amendment be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Herbert.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, well, well. What can one say about a government that is hell-bent on deliberately cutting funding to university education? It's hard to believe that the Abbott-Turnbull governments have and are doing what the Abbott and Turnbull governments have and are doing to Australian universities and university students. When the Turnbull government announced that they were going to cut university funding by $3.8 billion over 4 years and lower the payment threshold for students, I thought that the member for Warringah, Tony Abbott, was Prime Minister again, because this is the same outrageously unfair university package that the Abbott government tried to sell in 2014. And all that the Turnbull government has done is wrap up the same unfair package in glossy paper and put a fancy tinsel bow on top. But no one is fooled, and everyone can smell this bill for what it really is: an attack on the less fortunate in our community because it promotes elitist education. Time and time again, coalition governments want to attack universities and university students. And for the life of me, I simply cannot understand why, especially when the majority of the Turnbull government frontbench have benefited from a free university education thanks to the Whitlam Labor government. The majority of coalition frontbenchers attended university between 1974 and 1988, when students did not pay any fees. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and frontbench members such as Attorney General George Brandis and Defence Minister Maurice Payne and former Prime Minister Tony Abbott are among those who attended university when a university education was free. In total, 8 Turnbull government ministers were at university when students were not charged fees, while another 8 would have had at least 1 year of free university education. And why is this noteworthy? Because it points to the absolute hypocrisy of the Turnbull government frontbenchers, who have benefited from a free education at university, but want to make savage cuts to universities and students by raising the cost of their degrees and lowering the income threshold. The Turnbull government will not allow anyone else to reap the same benefits from a university education as they have done. Their degrees have given them greater earning capacity and career opportunities than those people who have not had the opportunity to gain a university qualification. Universities Australia Chief Executive Belinda Robinson said the Australian community could see it made no sense to cut university funding at a time of rapid and dramatic economic change. Ms Robinson also said that the government's plan to cut funding to universities is way out of kilter with the community's sentiment. She said, and I quote, "Voters don't want to see cuts to universities, which are key drivers to economic growth, because they create new jobs, reskill Australians and secure $24 billion a year in export income. Universities and their students have already contributed almost $4 billion to repair the budget over the last 6 years. Clearly, the Australian community is saying enough is enough, no more uni cuts." According to a 2012 report by the National Centre for Social and Economic Modelling, based at the University of Canberra, people with university qualifications are more likely to earn more than $1 million against those without degrees. And the irony of this is that a number of the Turnbull government members started their career in politics in university. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott enrolled in a combined economics law degree at Sydney University in 1976 and became president of the Student Representative Council in 1978. 9 years later, former Treasurer Joe Hockey also became Student Representative Council president at Sydney University. Minister for Environment and Energy Josh Frydenberg was president of the Monash Law Students' Society. Most politicians have had access to a quality university education that has delivered them a myriad of benefits. At its time, the Turnbull government put all of today's students at the heart of their policies. The Group of 8 comprises Australia's top 8 universities. A number of the Turnbull government members have attended a GO8 university, so one would think that they would take recommendations made by the GO8 very seriously. Recently, the Group of 8 made a number of recommendations as a result of the independent review into regional, rural and remote education. Not surprisingly, the number 1 recommendation was that the Senate block the current higher education reform bill because it puts, and I quote, at risk a broad range of university capacity building, including highly successful equity programs. The same university that Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull attended is recommending that the Senate blocks his own legislation. Recommendations wisely given, but sadly falling on deaf ears. The Group of 8 have also recommended that the federal government ensures that policies to support higher education outcomes for regional students are well designed and adequately and consistently funded. The federal government continues to invest in equity programs over the long term to support regional and remote students, including by increasing the value of the Higher Education Participation and Partnerships program to $205.1 million per year, as was forecast in Labor's 2012-13 budget for the 2015-16 year. The federal government review eligibility criteria for youth allowance and other linked student income support programs to ensure that they provide an appropriate level of support for students from regional areas. Absolutely no mention of cuts to university funding and no mention of drug testing for those people on New Start or youth allowance. The members of the Turnbull Government have received a big fail on their policy, a fail on their cuts and a fail on their plans for university, handed down by the universities that they attended. The Turnbull Government is cutting $401.8 million to Queensland universities. James Cook University in North Queensland will receive a cut of $37.1 million over 4 years. Teaching, student programs and university facilities will suffer as a result of these cuts. These cuts will damage Australia's research effort. There is an implicit cross-subsidy to research accepted throughout the higher education sector through the Commonwealth Grant Scheme, and this comes on top of the government's attempts to abolish $3.7 billion National Building Education Investment Fund. Australia has the second lowest level of public investment in universities in the OECD. These cuts will only make our record worse. And our students already pay the 6th highest fees in the OECD. The fee hikes in this bill will only make that record worse as well. Students will be put under pressure with higher fees and paying off larger debts sooner. Students will have to start paying back their loan when they are earning $42,000 instead of $869,000. The lower higher education loan program repayments will hit students at a time when they are trying to save for a house or start a family. $42,000 is approximately $6,000 more than the minimum wage. Lowering the help repayment threshold in combination with tax and transfer measures included in the 2017 budget will mean some graduates will face an effective marginal tax rate of more than 100%. Graduates caught between these policies will experience considerable fiscal and financial stress. Graduates earning $51,000, most of whom are likely to be women, will have less disposable income than someone earning $32,000. And the Turnbull government's disastrous policies go beyond attacking university students. They are also attacking TAFE students. And as a TAFE teacher in a previous life, I know just how unfair that truly is. But the government doesn't like to talk about this. But the lower repayment threshold for help debt will also apply to TAFE and vocational students who took out vet fee help or vet student loans. This means some of the hardest working but modestly paid people in the country will be affected. For example, people with a diploma or advanced diploma qualifications, such as early childhood educators, enrolled nurses and technicians. What is even worse is the move by the Turnbull government to introduce fees for enabling courses, which provide essential skills and confidence to prepare students for university. Students who finish these courses have gone on to become nurses, accountants, doctors, lawyers. These students are overwhelmingly from disadvantaged and underrepresented backgrounds. These courses have been free as they do not lead to a formal qualification. However, this government is trying to make these students pay $3,200 to actually sit in an enabling course. This shift is mean and unfair because we know that for a majority of these student fees and debt are a barrier to study. And what impact will these cuts have on jobs? Universities support more than 130,000 jobs across Australia. Cuts to universities will put jobs at risk, especially in regional areas like James Cook University and Central Queensland University in Townsville. No one, absolutely no one, is in favour of the Turnbull Government's university cuts. The peak body for universities, Universities Australia, said that an overwhelming majority of Vice-Chancellors could not recommend that the crossbench support this bill. The NTEU, the sector's union, is opposed to the bill because of the impact that the cuts and fee hikes will have on students. TAFEs are deeply concerned about the impact changes will have on their ability to offer certain enabling and pathway courses. Student groups are fiercely opposed to increases in fees and changes to loan repayments. It seems as though the only plan that the Turnbull Government has for universities is to cut, cut, cut. It's simply in their DNA to cut education funding. For example, $17 billion cuts to schools, $2.8 billion cuts to TAFE, with a further cut of $637,000 in this year's budget, $3.8 billion cut to Australian University, and increases in fees and debts for students. The question is, why is this government so hell-bent on these cuts? Because they want to give a $65 billion tax cut to big business. Labor governments are the only governments that will ever fight for a fair and properly funded education system. It is only Labor that has a history of delivering accessible and affordable education for all. Labor understands that governments are supposed to support universities, to support students, to support the jobs of the future. When Labor was last in government, we lifted investment in universities from $8 billion in 2007 to $14 billion in 2013. Labor also opened the doors to our universities for an additional 190,000 Australians, many of whom were the first in their family to attend university. And why did Labor lift participation to universities? Because Labor understands that education is the cornerstone to innovation and our economic future. We know that many of the jobs of the future will require a post-school qualification. That's why cutting funding to TAFE and universities is one of the worst decisions a government can make. Many parents across Australia see a university education as a necessary opportunity to give their children the best career options. Tertiary education is not only the right of a privileged few. If we are to be a nation that is ready for the challenges, innovations and jobs of the future, then we must invest in education. The Turnbull Government is out of touch by creating a situation where students are required to pay even more for their education, while the government gives corporations making billions of dollars a tax cut. The Parliamentary Budget Office is predicting that student fees will soar by 40% as universities recover the costs as a result of the Turnbull Government's planned 20% government funding cut. The Turnbull Government must stop recycling former Prime Minister Tony Abbott's policies. Nobody wants the zombified Abbott policies. They were scary enough the first time. Education is a human right. It is not for the few who can afford it. Education is for everyone. In particular, the aspirational and access should not be based on your earning capacity or your parents' credit card. In the words chanted by some of the many passionate university students, BS, come off it, our education is not for profit.